My name is Nathaniel Nate Albright, and I've served as the regional fire chief for the past decade in Woodbridge County, a quaint region nestled between rolling hills and placid rivers. My job involves overseeing multiple fire stations, coordinating emergency response strategies, and ensuring that each community, urban or rural, is prepared for potential hazards. Despite the intensity of my work, I've always cherished the dream of a peaceful retirement someday. That dream was a driving force behind my recent purchase of a property in Garden Grove Retirement Villas, GGRV, a quiet HOA-managed community catering to people aged 55 and older. Garden Grove's brochure promised serene living, well-maintained lawns, and a sense of belonging among residents. My wife, Marjorie, and I were not yet retired, but the property offered a calm weekend getaway from city noise. We loved the concept of living among active retirees who valued neighborly bonds and mutual support. On paper, everything looked perfect. Little did we know, the seemingly placid environment was controlled by a single domineering figure, Brenda Lowry, who, for reasons I'd come to understand all too well, was universally nicknamed Karen. She was a middle-aged woman who had wedged herself into the center of all HOA affairs, micromanaging the community with an authoritarian edge. Our first week at GGRV was mostly uneventful. We admired the landscaped lawns and the tranquil pond at the community center. The neighbors seemed friendly. Some were retirees still full of zest. Many engaged in hobbies like gardening, painting, or leisurely walks around the well-kept paths. On a mild Tuesday afternoon, Marjorie and I were unloading groceries when a tall woman marched up our driveway. She wore a neatly pressed blouse, pencil skirt, and carried a large leather binder. Her short, honey-brown hair was styled into a severe bob, and her expression hovered between condescension and forced politeness. "Good afternoon. You must be the Albrights," she said crisply. "I'm Brenda Lowry, president of the HOA. But most just call me Ms. Lowry, or Karen. I prefer Ms. Lowry," she added with a tight smile. We shook hands. She immediately explained the rules and regulations, handing me a thick sheaf of papers labeled Garden Grove Retirement Villas Covenant. As we flipped through the first few pages, phrases jumped out. Approved paint colors, strict lawn maintenance schedule, visitor parking passes, and noise restrictions. Brenda, Karen, took great care to highlight particularly harsh fines for any violation. Marjorie shot me a look that said, "Is this place as relaxing as we thought?" Karen ended with a rhetorical flourish. "We run a tight ship here, Mr. Albright. We have many elderly residents who need peace and quiet. If you have questions, consult me before you do anything." Then she gave a little nod of dismissal and left. Though I found her approach off-putting, I initially chalked it up to an overzealous volunteer. HOAs often had Karens, but maybe her bark was worse than her bite. Sadly, I would soon discover she didn't just bark. She could deliver a damaging bite when her authority was challenged. Over the next few weeks, our admiration for Garden Grove's tidy appearance was marred by ongoing friction with HOA notices. For instance, violation notice number 1. Our mailbox color was off-shade from the approved cream hue. We had 72 hours to repaint or face a $50 fine. Violation notice number 2, a noise complaint about our air conditioning unit, which Karen claimed exceeded the community's decibel limit. An HOA inspector threatened a fine if we didn't replace it with a quieter model. Each notice carried Karen's signature or a stamp from the HOA with Brenda Lowry, president. I asked neighbors if they'd encountered similar strict enforcement. Some shrugged and said yes, but they complied out of fear. Others confided that if you opposed Karen, she'd triple your troubles. She used her position to extort compliance, caring little for actual fairness. Marjorie grew concerned. I was used to dealing with high-pressure scenarios in firefighting, such as tackling raging infernos or coordinating first responders during accidents. But dealing with a petty HOA tyrant was uncharted territory. We decided to remain calm, correct small infractions if reasonable, and avoid provoking Karen's wrath. At least that was our plan. Despite Karen's overreach, many aspects of GGRV remained lovely, largely thanks to its warm-hearted residents. We befriended an elderly couple named Betty and Howard Kim, longtime teachers who had retired to Garden Grove for tranquility. They loved strolling around the pond, sometimes hosting informal morning coffees on their porch. Over one such coffee get-together, Betty confided. We've seen Karen's tactics. She once had a neighbor's shrubbery forcibly removed because it grew 2 inches beyond the approved boundary. The man contested it, so she reported him for alleged code violations. He eventually moved away. Howard added, we all keep our heads down. Most folks here want to live out their golden years without stress. Karen thrives on fear. She claims every measure is for community safety. Marjorie and I exchanged worried looks. I realized that if Karen ever found out I was a high-ranking fire official, it might cause friction. HOAs often fuss about emergency vehicles or perceived intrusions. I resolved to keep my professional life quiet for now, hoping we'd never butt heads over something as crucial as safety. Fate, however, had other ideas. One Saturday afternoon, I returned from a short errand to find Karen on our porch, her nose wrinkled with disapproval. She had 2 security guards with her, private hires that GGRV used for community patrol. They were rummaging through some storage boxes near our carport. Alarmed, I approached. Excuse me, what's going on? Karen spun around. We received an anonymous tip. You were storing flammable materials in an unapproved manner, she declared. Her eyes flicked to the uniform I was partially wearing, my official navy blue pants with reflective stripes. Where have you been, Mr. Albright? I struggled not to snap at her intrusion. I stepped out briefly. What flammable materials are you talking about? Karen prodded a can of paint thinner in an open box. Right here. This is a hazard if not stored per HOA guidelines. Don't you realize how easily a community like ours can burn? My annoyance flared. As a firefighter, I recognized the safety hazard potential. But it was standard practice to keep paint thinner in a sealed container, away from ignition sources, which I had. I calmly explained. Ma'am, this is sealed and placed on a high shelf. That's actually quite safe. Moreover, you're not authorized to trespass. She cut me off. You left your carport unlocked. We have the right to ensure community standards. I'll let it slide this time, but I'm writing you a warning. Next time, we'll fine you or have your materials confiscated. Her arrogance rankled me. Her fear-mongering about fire hazards felt ironic, especially to someone who spent his career preventing such dangers. Still, I forced a measured response. Understood, I said, though inside I was seething. If only she knew whom she was lecturing about fire safety. Amid petty spats over HOA rules, a larger threat loomed. Early summer brought scorching heat and dryness to the region. With minimal rain, the surrounding grasslands turned brittle. Our county's fire and rescue services began issuing advisories, reminding communities, including HOAs, to ensure accessible roads and up-to-code hydrants in case of wildfires or structural blazes. I quietly contacted the Garden Grove HOA's safety committee, one that Karen apparently overshadowed, to check their readiness. Did the hydrants function properly? Were the roads wide enough for fire trucks? Did the community have an evacuation plan, especially for older residents with mobility issues? To my dismay, the volunteer on that committee side. Karen sets the budget. She's cut back on hydrant maintenance to lower HOA fees. Our roads are partially blocked with decorative gates and landscaping. Karen thinks wide roads spoil the neighborhood aesthetics. A sinking feeling formed in my stomach. In an emergency, minutes saved or lost can be the difference between life and death. And here was an entire community of older adults left vulnerable by an HOA more concerned with appearance than safety. Summer wore on, and temperatures soared. News outlets flashed warnings about potential brush fires. In early July, a cluster of smaller fires erupted in the county's outskirts. Although our local stations contained them quickly, everyone grew tense. The region was a tinderbox. One stifling afternoon, as I sipped lemonade on my porch with Marjorie, I noticed a faint smell of smoke drifting from beyond Garden Grove's property line. We saw a thin column of gray smoke rising in the distance. My professional instincts awakened. Could it be a brush fire? I grabbed my phone, quickly contacting the main Woodbridge County dispatch. They'd already received calls about a possible fire near the wooded area adjacent to GGRV. Fire units were en route. I told dispatch I was on site and would do a quick visual. They knew me well enough to trust my judgment. I hopped into my car and drove around the perimeter, noticing the smoke intensifying behind a row of old pine trees near the retirement homes. Flames flickered among the undergrowth, inching closer to the fence line that separated GGRV from an empty lot. This was definitely a situation that could escalate. Rushing back into the community, I saw multiple retirees stepping out of their homes, concerned about the smoke. Some of them looked confused, not sure what steps to take. Garden Grove didn't appear to have a coordinated evacuation plan. I dialed the local station chief. "We have an active brush fire approaching. We need engines here now," I said, voice taut. By the time I hung up, the first pumper truck arrived at the front gate, sirens off, presumably to avoid panicking the elderly residents. The firefighters signaled me for instructions. I guided them to the fence line behind the retirement villas, but the gate was locked. We wasted precious seconds as the firefighters tried different keys from the lockbox. The gate wouldn't budge. Meanwhile, plumes of smoke billowed overhead, and the crackle of fire grew louder. Realizing the gate's manual lock was jammed or had a different combination, the truck driver decided to back up and drive around to an alternate access point. All the while, the wind carried the flames steadily in our direction. If they jumped the fence or caught the eaves of the closest retirement villas, it could become a rapidly escalating inferno, especially among older homes that might not be up to code. As the crew and I circled around to a second entrance, who should appear but Karen, flanked by 2 security guards in matching polo shirts. She marched up to the pumper truck, arms folded across her chest. "You can't just barge in," she snapped. "This is a private community. You need pre-approved clearance before driving around." One of the firefighters, a young lieutenant named Calderon, tried to explain, "Ma'am, we have an active fire approaching. We must set up a perimeter and possibly evacuate people. Please stand aside." Karen bristled. "Nonsense. I haven't authorized any general evacuation. We have older residents who can't be disturbed. We have protocols, and I won't have you driving heavy trucks on our pristine lawns or damaging our gates without the HOA's say-so." Calderon looked stunned. He glanced at me, perplexed. I stepped forward. "Ma'am, these men are from Woodbridge County Fire and Rescue. We have an emergency. Let them through." Karen sneered at me. "And who are you to override HOA policy? You're just a resident here." I took a slow breath, deciding it was time to reveal my position. "I'm Nathaniel Albright, the regional fire chief for this county. We have legal authority to enter in an emergency. If you delay us, you're endangering lives." Karen's eyes narrowed. She seemed to falter, then retorted, "I don't care if you're the President of the United States. We have rules. You can't just damage property by forcing gates open. Let me make some calls." Behind her, the security guard stood as if to physically block the truck. My frustration skyrocketed. Every second counted with the fire. If it spread to the villas, older residents with limited mobility might be trapped. I glimpsed black smoke rising ominously above the fence line. We had no time for power trips. Another engine arrived, along with a smaller brush fire truck. They joined the first crew, forming a mini convoy, but Karen refused to let them pass the locked gates. The crews were forced to weigh whether to ram the gate or wait for a legal directive. Meanwhile, the radio crackled. The brush fire was intensifying, with shifting winds pushing it closer to GGRV's property line. Dispatch asked if we needed more resources or an evacuation order. I stepped aside, calling the local police department. "Chief Albright here, urgent request. We have a fire in progress at Garden Grove Retirement Villas, and the HOA is blocking firefighters from entry. We need immediate police assistance to secure the area and allow us to do our job." The sergeant on duty responded swiftly. "We'll send units ASAP." Returning to the standoff, I saw anxious residents peeking from windows, uncertain whether to flee or stay. Some were mobility impaired, reliant on walkers or oxygen tanks. The very thought of them being trapped in a potential blaze churned my stomach with dread. This was beyond a petty HOA dispute. Lives were at stake. Karen kept prattling about community standards and property damage liability. The lead firefighter, Captain Morales, quietly told me, "Chief, if we can't pass, we might have to forcibly remove the gate. But that can lead to a lawsuit from the HOA. We typically prefer local law enforcement to handle it." "Understood," I said, glancing toward the thickening smoke. "But we can't wait much longer. Let's see if the police show up soon. We'll do everything by the book." Moments later, a black and white police cruiser pulled up, followed by 2 more. Uniformed officers hopped out. One approached Karen, asking her to step aside for an emergency response. She refused, citing HOA regulations. The officer gave her a warning. "Ma'am, this is a matter of public safety. You must comply, or we'll have to arrest you for obstruction." Karen turned bright red. She argued that the residents didn't want their streets torn up by heavy fire trucks, that the scene was under control, and that she would personally handle any small brush fire. Her denial of reality was staggering. Captain Morales radioed me. "Chief, we're losing the perimeter if we wait any longer." Enough was enough. The police officer repeated the order. Karen stepped forward to physically block him, pushing against his chest. That was all the cause the officer needed. He motioned to his partner, and they promptly handcuffed Karen while she sputtered in protest, threatening lawsuits. With Karen in custody for obstruction, the security guards lost their nerve. They quietly stepped away, allowing the firefighters to proceed. The police used a bolt cutter on one of the locked side gates, and the engines roared into the property, positioning themselves near the threatened villas. Meanwhile, frantic phone calls had begun among residents. Some were packing valuables, unsure if an evacuation would be mandated. Captain Morales, Calderon, and I performed a quick assessment. The fire was creeping toward a cluster of units on the far side. We had to act swiftly to extinguish flames and protect people. A third engine arrived from the North Station, joining the formation. Hoses were laid out, hydrants tested. Thankfully, the water pressure was decent, though not perfect. Firefighters advanced with caution into the smoky area behind the fence, battling the brush fire. I guided them, pointing out potential hazards like propane tanks or wooden decks that could accelerate the blaze. In the midst of this controlled chaos, one question loomed. Had Karen's obstruction already cost us precious minutes that might endanger the retirees' villas? At the height of the incident, an urgent call crackled over the radio. An elderly couple inside Unit 14 reported smoke filling their backyard. They needed assistance to evacuate. Captain Morales directed a team to retrieve them, but the street layout was congested with cars parked on either side. Some vehicles lacked the required clearance for large fire apparatus. I hopped onto a smaller rescue truck with a few firefighters and navigated the tight lanes. We arrived to find thick smoke wafting across the lawn. The couple, both in their late 70s, had difficulty walking quickly. They coughed from the smoky air. The flames were maybe 50 yards away, but the wind direction threatened to push it closer. We helped them gather a few essential medications and guided them to the rescue truck. In my peripheral vision, I saw ember flecks drifting overhead, a sign the fire was vigorously burning nearby. Yet because of the delay at the gate, we had less time to contain it before it reached these homes. Marjorie, who was assisting neighbors at a safe gathering point, called me, worry lacing her voice. "Are people making it out okay? This is so terrifying." I reassured her. "We're doing everything we can. The guys are hitting the flames from multiple angles. Stay calm and keep everyone away from the danger zone." Firefighters unspooled hoses, creating a defensive line behind the villas. Water cannons arced into the brush, soaking the dry grass to halt the flames' spread. Smoke choked the air, and the heat radiated fiercely. But these seasoned professionals executed their plan expertly. Gradually, the inferno's forward progress slowed. Additional crews from my region arrived to assist. After nearly an hour of intense firefighting, the brush fire was knocked down to a smolder. The immediate threat to the retirement villas eased. No units had actually caught fire, thanks to the quick response, once we got in. But the fiasco left everyone shaken. As the smoke lifted, I surveyed the scene. Worn-out firefighters resting on curbs, paramedics checking on seniors who'd inhaled too much smoke, and the frightened expressions of residents. My chest tightened at the realization that it could have been so much worse. A few more minutes of delay might have cost lives. While we'd fought the flames, the police had driven Karen away in handcuffs. She'd been booked for obstruction of emergency services and possibly other charges. Her public meltdown, in front of uniformed officers and stunned residents, guaranteed that news of her arrest would spread fast. In the following days, the shock of the near disaster rippled through Garden Grove. Many recognized that Karen's stubbornness had jeopardized their safety. Residents who once feared her realized the dire consequences of letting one power-hungry individual hamper crisis response. Though the brush fire was contained, an undercurrent of anger simmered. People asked, why was the gate locked? Why didn't the HOA maintain an open route for emergency vehicles? Did Karen intentionally refuse to share the key? The truth was painfully clear. In her zeal for absolute control and her hatred of property damage, Karen had gambled with the lives of older residents. Officials from the Woodbridge County Fire Marshal's office launched an inquiry into the fiasco. They interviewed witnesses, firefighters, police, and GGRV residents, compiling a dossier on how Karen's actions delayed the response. Her personal demands that no gate be broken, no lawn be damaged, had forced the trucks to wait. The minutes lost could have been fatal. Additionally, the County Board of Supervisors demanded answers from the Garden Grove HOA. They wanted to know if it was Karen alone who mandated the locked gates or if the entire board was complicit. The board members scrambled to distance themselves from Karen, claiming they never intended to block emergency vehicles. But a paper trail emerged indicating Karen had lobbied for extra locks and narrower lanes to preserve aesthetics, ignoring warnings about fire safety. Local media latched onto the scandal. Headlines read, HOA president arrested after blocking firefighters, and retirement community residents nearly burned as Karen refuses access. Many who had tolerated Karen's tyranny were outraged, feeling betrayed that her petty rule nearly cost them their homes, or worse, their lives. Karen spent 2 nights in jail before posting bail. At her arraignment, the district attorney announced charges: obstruction of emergency services, reckless endangerment, criminal negligence, and possibly more if the investigation uncovered further misconduct. News reporters pressed for a statement, but Karen's lawyer only muttered general denials. Ms. Lowry intended no harm. She simply enforced community regulations to prevent property damage. The public reaction was scathing. Even those who disliked government interference recognized that firefighters must never be blocked in an emergency, especially in a retirement community. Meanwhile, families who experienced the terror of potential entrapment considered civil suits. Some were older couples who already had health conditions compromised by smoke inhalation. The cluster of possible lawsuits threatened Karen's personal assets, as well as the HOA's insurance coverage. This was shaping up to be a catastrophic downfall for Karen. With Karen arrested, the HOA's remaining board members held an emergency session. Freed from her looming presence, many directors admitted they'd cowered to her for years. Some resigned, citing moral objections. Others tried to hold the community together. Residents demanded immediate policy changes. 24/7 gate access for emergency services, with a universal lock code shared with first responders. Removal of extra locks and obstructions that hamper large vehicles. Mandatory fire safety inspections of hydrants, egress routes, and building materials. Revamp of bylaws to ensure no single person, Karen or otherwise, could unilaterally block emergency action. These demands gained unanimous support among frightened retirees. The memory of thick smoke swirling around the villas, the frantic attempts to evacuate, and the delayed arrival of firefighters forged a wave of determination. Never again would they let an HOA official override life-saving measures. As the local fire chief, I temporarily led an effort to educate residents about fire safety. Some had felt powerless before. Now, they wanted to be proactive, learning how to handle future emergencies and where to go if an evacuation was needed. My own background allowed me to coordinate these educational sessions easily. Along with my team, I set up drills, taught seniors how to check smoke detectors, and explained the county's emergency alert system. Marjorie noted how the community blossomed in Karen's absence. People who once kept to themselves, fearing arbitrary fines, suddenly felt free to chat, host small gatherings, and share concerns. Betty and Howard Kim, the retired teachers, hosted a thank you cookout for the firefighters, turning it into a communal celebration of resilience. Behind the scenes, though, Karen's criminal case ground forward. The district attorney's office collected evidence from outraged seniors who had witnessed her attempt to keep firefighters out. The stories were harrowing. Some seniors had already been ill, reliant on oxygen tanks, forced to endure thick smoke because precious minutes had been lost. The public thirst for justice grew. 6 months after the brush fire incident, the trial began at the Woodbridge County Courthouse. Karen, dressed in a businesslike skirt suit, faced a grim array of felony and misdemeanor counts. The prosecution's opening statement emphasized that her interference could have led to catastrophic loss of life. They displayed maps, gate logs, and a timeline showing exactly how the fire spread while firefighters were blocked. Witness after witness took the stand. Captain Morales recounted how Karen physically stood in front of the truck, refusing to unlock the gates. Lieutenant Calderon described precious minutes ticking away while the fire advanced. Various seniors testified about the terror they felt, worried they'd be trapped if the fire spread. I testified in my capacity as regional fire chief and a resident. I explained that blocking first responders during an active fire was not merely a bureaucratic misstep, but a dangerous act that endangered lives, especially in a retirement community with vulnerable individuals. Karen's defense tried to argue she was merely enforcing HOA rules to protect property and that she had no intention to harm anyone. But the weight of evidence against her was overwhelming. Her own statements, captured on police body cams, revealed her telling the firefighters they had no right to enter without her permission. After a week of testimony and evidence presentation, the jury took just 3 hours to deliberate. They returned with a unanimous guilty verdict on the major charges: obstruction of emergency services and criminal negligence. Karen sat stone-faced as the verdict was read, her shoulders rigid. The judge scheduled sentencing for a month later, warning that the severity of her actions meant substantial prison time was likely. Outside the courtroom, a collective sense of relief washed over the GGRV residents who had come to watch. Some openly wept with gratitude that justice had been served. Others felt a sorrowful realization. They had allowed one tyrant to hold them hostage for years. But at least now, the system had stepped in to correct that wrong. On a crisp autumn morning, the courtroom was packed again. The prosecution submitted victim impact statements, detailing how Karen's obstruction could have resulted in a deadly tragedy. Seniors described the mental anguish and fear they continued to live with. Family members testified about how they almost lost parents or grandparents that day. Karen's defense attorney tried to portray her as misguided but not malicious. They pleaded for leniency, claiming she'd never had a criminal record before, that she was a pillar of the community. But the judge was unswayed. In a scathing statement, the judge underscored how firefighters and police risk their lives to protect the public, especially the elderly, and that interfering with them showed utter disregard for human life. Karen was sentenced to several years in state prison. She was also ordered to pay heavy fines and restitution to the impacted families, plus costs for the firefighting resources she delayed. The judge approved the possibility of property seizure to satisfy the hefty civil judgments filed by residents who had suffered emotional and medical harm. Trembling, Karen was led away in handcuffs. Whatever illusions she had about her own untouchable power were shattered. Karen's downfall left the Garden Grove Retirement Villas HOA in disarray. The community demanded sweeping reforms. A new board was elected, pledging transparency and collaboration with local emergency services. They quickly allocated funds to maintain hydrants, widen roads, and implement an open-gate policy for first responders. No longer overshadowed by Karen's iron fist, the neighborhood found renewed unity. Freed from arbitrary citations, residents embraced small freedoms, painting porch railings their preferred colors or planting different flowers without fear of fines. More importantly, they felt safer, knowing a real emergency would not be stymied by bureaucratic obstinacy. Meanwhile, the families of seniors who had suffered during the brush fire incident pursued civil lawsuits. The HOA's insurer balked at covering claims triggered by criminal acts. That meant Karen, personally, would likely lose her assets to settle any awards. The once formidable HOA president faced financial ruin alongside her prison sentence. In the months following Karen's sentencing, I continued my duties as regional fire chief. Often, I dropped by Garden Grove to see how the community was rebuilding trust. I organized additional safety drills, helping seniors become more resilient in times of crisis. Marjorie joined me, volunteering to give basic CPR and first aid lessons. The transformation was remarkable. Garden Grove's new board collaborated with my department to install more robust fire safety signage, easy-to-read evacuation routes, and a digital lock system for gates that gave immediate access to any responding fire crew or ambulance. Residents were no longer isolated or ignorant of emergency protocols. Betty and Howard Kim praised the changes. "I wish we'd had this new approach years ago," Betty said, smiling. "We spent so long tiptoeing around one person's demands, we forgot what it meant to be a supportive community." Howard nodded. It's a shame it took a fire to open our eyes. But at least now we can focus on living out our retirement in peace. Several months later, a letter arrived from the state correctional facility where Karen was serving time. Addressed to Nathaniel Albright, it bore Karen's signature. She requested a visit. At first, I crumpled the letter, not eager to face her again. But curiosity gnawed at me. Perhaps she sought closure or a chance to apologize. I arranged a brief meeting. Seated across a metal table in the prison's visitation hall, Karen appeared gaunter, her once perfect hair now grown out awkwardly. She spoke softly, a far cry from the tyrant I'd known. "I never meant for people to get hurt," she said, eyes downcast. "I was trying to keep the community safe from property damage. I guess I got carried away with my authority." I studied her. "Karen, you nearly caused a catastrophe. Residents could have died. Firefighters, too." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know. I realize now what I did was selfish and reckless. I've lost everything. My job, my home, respect. I'm sorry for what it's worth." Though I doubted she'd ever truly comprehend the depth of her wrongdoing, I offered a measured response. "I hope you use this time to reflect. The community is moving on. Maybe someday you can learn from this." The guard ended our visit soon after. Karen's apology, if genuine, did little to erase the damage she caused. But at least she no longer wielded the power to endanger others. Back in Garden Grove, life moved forward. The residents formed an official community safety committee, ensuring that older members received help with smoke alarms, fire extinguishers, and occasional home safety checks. The new HOA leadership instituted a check-in system for neighbors, especially those living alone, so that no one would be overlooked in an emergency. My wife and I, although not fully retired, visited Garden Grove more frequently. We found ourselves invited to potlucks, game nights, and group walks around the scenic pond. The fear that once gripped many retirees slowly lifted, replaced by genuine fellowship and a sense of security. The near disaster had galvanized the community to become more caring and less insular. Some joked that Karen inadvertently gave us the best thing ever, a reason to unite. Indeed, adversity can spark profound positive change if people choose to stand together. The final outcome for Karen was severe but just: a multi-year prison sentence, heavy fines, and the forfeiture of her home in Garden Grove to cover civil claims. She became a cautionary tale in the county, a prime example of how an HOA official's vanity and power trip can transform a peaceful community into a ticking time bomb. For me, the ordeal underscored a key lesson. No matter how many fires you've extinguished or emergencies you've coordinated, tyranny in small places can be just as destructive if left unchecked. Marjorie and I found relief that we had intervened in time. At the same time, the entire fiasco was a sobering reminder that crisis response hinges on open cooperation from all parties, including homeowners associations. Eventually, the story of Karen and her blockade receded from the headlines, replaced by new events and local news. But Garden Grove's residents continued telling newcomers about the day a brush fire threatened their villas, and how a misguided HOA president tried to block firefighters from saving them. They spoke of how the regional fire chief, once just a seemingly ordinary neighbor, helped steer them to safety and transform the community for the better. Time marched on. The old fence line was replaced with a fire-resistant barrier, trimmed vegetation, and a well-marked emergency access gate. Garden Grove blossomed in more ways than one. Architectural freedoms. The new board loosened strict cosmetic rules, allowing personal expressions of color and decor. Enhanced safety, regular fire drills, improved hydrant testing, and open cooperation with local fire and rescue. Community spirit. Freed from Karen's shadow, residents embraced shared events, holiday parties, volunteer drives, and watchful neighbor programs. Betty and Howard Kim often teased me about how I never mentioned my rank when we first met. "We thought you were a mild-mannered ex-firefighter, and it turned out you were the top dog all along," they joked. But I never wanted the community to treat me differently. I only wanted to ensure everyone was safe. When I look back on that tense day, with the flames licking at the property line and Karen standing in the path of the fire trucks, I realize how close we came to a tragedy. Yet the story ended with justice served and reforms enacted. The next time a crisis arises, be it fire, flood, or some other emergency, Garden Grove stands better prepared, never again to be held hostage by one person's destructive arrogance. Karen, meanwhile, sat in prison, her property confiscated, her illusions of power shattered. The legal system and community demands had made an example of her. In the end, the moral was simple: safety and human life trump any petty rule or self-appointed dictator. And that is how a quiet retirement neighborhood overcame its darkest test, united by common sense, compassion, and a firm stand against tyranny.